Self-inquiry in 3 parts. So part 1, this video today, is going to be on traditional self-inquiry, very summarized. And then I'm going to introduce self-inquiry in the way I talk about it, in the way I talk about it in my book, and some initial approaches to starting to formulate your question or formulate your orientation to self-inquiry. And then the second video will be the process itself, or asking the question, or the moment of inquiry. And then the third video is going to be, what do you do after? And other things that put a context around this whole process so that you don't get off track, or so you don't end up in the common cul-de-sacs or confusing sticking points that people get into with self-inquiry. So the first thing I want to say is, I don't think self-inquiry is the be-all, end-all necessarily. It's not the only way people wake up. Many people wake up without ever hearing of self-inquiry, myself included. Many people wake up without hearing about awakening at all, and just kind of wake up on their own, which can be challenging and confusing, but it happens. Many people wake up through Zen practice, through shikantaza, just merely sitting. And many people wake up through the use of a koan, which would be more like Renzai Zen, one-minded approach, focusing your attention down into one point until the mind gets so clear and so one-pointed that the ego that's always trying to grasp again and again your attention just finally slips, finally fails, and truth is revealed. Instant enlightenment, so to speak, or kensho. Not necessarily enlightenment, but an instant awakening for sure. So there are many ways people wake up. There are many ways these shifts occur. But self-inquiry is central, certainly, to Advaita Vedanta, or Hindu approaches to awakening, and central to a lot of forms of contemporary online Dharma and awakening and so forth. And I would even say there's crossover into Buddhism, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of this because I think it's interesting, but then we'll go into more practical terms as far as like how to approach this. So first, I'm not an expert in traditional Advaita Vedanta at all. I've read a little bit. I've read a few of the key Upanishads, and I understand the pointings and so forth, but I'm certainly no scholar or expert, but I think I can summarize them reasonably simply. So first of all, I guess I want to say that I'm going to make a distinction between traditional Advaita Vedanta and contemporary Advaita Vedanta in terms of like Ramana Maharshi, who is a very well-known modern Indian sage and had an approach to self-inquiry that many people consider to be a very direct approach, a very immediate approach to realization. So traditional Advaita Vedanta very simply separates the awakening process into kind of 3 categories or 3 steps. And this is kind of considered a gradual awakening process. Now, I would say that definitely happens. However, even with a gradual awakening process, from what I've seen, most people have a distinct shift at some point. There's a kind of fertile ground that allows that to happen, and that will feel like some kind of opening, some kind of progress, say more mystical states, more deep samadhi states when you're meditating or contemplating over time. But at some point there's a pretty distinct shift in identity, and that's what I call awakening or kensho. But that's neither here nor there. The point I want to make is that in traditional Advaita Vedanta, it's considered somewhat of a gradual path. The first step being knowledge or listening. And the idea here is that by learning, by understanding, by listening to a realized teacher, or to sacred texts or the Upanishads, certain passages in the Upanishads, we start to clarify the mind. We start to reorient to truth. We start to intuit and really internally process that there's something beyond the normal sort of flat way that we experience life, right? The thought-identified way of experiencing life. And I think that this is probably true in most people's path, even if they're not aware of it, that there are certain things that happen to you significantly before awakening often that that really start to till the soil, that start to lay the tracks for what's going to come. For me, there were many things I could have. I can't say for sure which one did what, but there were several sort of pre-tastes of awakening, or certain events or certain experiences I had that were mystical in nature, or psychedelic in nature, or just things people said to me that were very specific, very direct, coming from a person who was awake, and that transmitted something. So there was definitely a preparatory ground for me. I did some reading, although I was not obsessed with reading about enlightenment, because I didn't care about concepts. I didn't care about metaphysics really, or even epistemology or any philosophy, any of that. I was interested in directly addressing my own suffering. Yeah. So for me, there was this kind of first phase, this like sort of preparation phase, which in Advaita Vedanta would be called Sravana. I'm not great at pronouncing Hindu terms, which is listening to teachings of enlightened teachers, gurus, again, and or certain passages that may be resonant and transmit, and until you're ready for the next step, which is manana. Manana means essentially inquiry. It's sustained reflection to remove doubt. So this is the beginning of self-inquiry, or this is proper self-inquiry. And then at some point, the third step is called nidhi dhyasana, which is essentially absorption. It's a contemplative samadhi, absorption. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on these because largely I don't have a lot of background in these areas. But what I can say is that Ramana Maharshi, in the way at least I perceive his teachings and what he said and what he did and so forth, or how he transmitted, it kind of combines all of these. It's like he gives an approach that's sort of all of them at the same time, but I think he minimizes the need for number one, probably. The first step, because he didn't really, I don't think, had that himself. His contemplation started with himself. He didn't necessarily, that I know of, listen to a lot of doctrine or gurus or anything like that. He was 15 years old, actually, when he had his first big shift. So perhaps it was karmic, perhaps he asked the right question at the right time, but his whole process was very much direct, right? So that's kind of how he describes self-inquiry, as he would recommend practicing pretty much everybody who asked, for everybody who asked. And he describes it simply, summarized here, in 3 steps, but they're all kind of the same step, and they all happen very quickly, and anyone can do this immediately. It doesn't take practice. So he recommends asking the question, who am I? Starting with who am I, right? And then noticing when you ask that question, all of the objects of experience that come up, specifically thoughts, right? As I would often describe this, you may come up with thoughts that say, I'm this age, I'm this gender, I have this name, I have this history. And he would say, or at least he did say in his book, when these thoughts arise, then just ask, to whom did these thoughts occur, right? Do you see this? Do you see that step? It's like, who am I? Asking a genuine question and then just watching what happens without analyzing, and then just noticing the thoughts that come, right? And whatever thought comes, ask yourself, to whom did this thought occur? And essentially, the answer is always going to be to me, right? As long as this false I thought is intact. The answer will be it occurred to me, obviously, right? So if you're listening to me, try not to do this, or try not to take this on conceptually, but like actually go into your experience, because it's very simple. Who am I? Just ask the question and see what happens. And sooner or later, a thought's going to appear, right? It's going to say, I am this, I am that, or I don't understand, or whatever it's going to say. As soon as that thought appears, ask for whom does this thought occur, or to whom does this thought occur? Right? And if you ask that genuinely, it's going to direct you to this thought that says, I am, or I, or me, right? Then the third part of this is you ask again, well, then who am I? Do you see how that works? And you can keep doing that. That's essentially what it is. It's like a loop of inquiry that doesn't allow the other kind of loop to keep hold of you, which is the thought loop. It's kind of reversing, in my sense of this. I didn't use this to wake up myself, but I think it's very clever. It's like using the thought system itself, but almost like going through it backwards. It's almost like you're undoing the tendency to identify and bind into thought again and again and again. So he's just unwinding that very directly. And the ultimate result of this is the I thought will disappear. The I thought will disappear is what he says. And then the simple result of that is the self. He uses the term capital S, but the self that is not contingent upon or not relegated to any objects of thought, any object, will be all that's left. That's where you'll rest. That's where you always rest. That's all that's there, right? Sort of thing. Now, I don't know the background of this, and I can't say for sure whether he would call that a witness state, but I would say it's not a witness state if done properly. If it done properly, that does not lead to a witness state. So that's how Ramana described self-inquiry. For me, in my experience with the way I approached this stuff, it wasn't a questioning who am I sort of thing, but components of what Ramana said there are exactly what I did. And the way I ferreted that out was reading a chapter in a book called 3 Pillars of Zen. Many people here have heard me say that. And specifically, I did kind of use a one-pointed approach to kind of narrow my mind down, clarify the mind, because my mind was so busy, so much anxiety, so much thought, so much trying to solve problems through thought, which is like beating your head against a wall because it feels good when you stop, and then you start beating it again. It was like that, right? So for me, there was something really powerful about narrowing the mind into one point. And you can use a koan to do that. The instructions in the 3 Pillars of Zen are very clear. It's beautiful. In the chapters where the Zen master is interacting with people one-on-one who are going through this process in deep meditation in a sesshin. That's how I figured it out. And it calmed my mind enough until there was almost like a pre-stage of awakening it was kind of like a staging ground where there was definitely a stability of mind, a calming of mind, but that wasn't the awakening yet. What it allowed me to do, it was like driving a wedge between, I guess, the perceiver, whatever that is. I'll just say the perceiver, but not say it's something solid or something physical or something, a mental faculty. But for the purposes, I'm just saying there was a wedge driven between the perceiver and every thought object. That was clear. It didn't cause a shift in identity yet, but very soon it did. And the way it did that was then I just started noticing every single thought was not what I was, for sure, right? In fact, this could be described as the third stage in a traditional Advaita Vedanta. Again, the term is nidhi dhyasana. And the reason is because they tend to use neti, but in a specific way, seeing that the most core experience, the most central experience is not this, it's not that, it's not that, it's not this thought, it's not this object, it's not this object. And that's called neti. And I think there's more than one way to use that, probably. Some ways I've seen people describe it, I think can become almost nihilistic or too almost dissociated. Well, not almost. I think it can cause dissociation if you tend that way and you don't really get what they're telling you to do. But I think if done properly, what it's really telling you to do is exactly what I figured out, and that was seeing that every single thought that arose was definitely not defining me, whatever the hell I am. But I wasn't contemplating me at that point. I wasn't going, well, what am I? I didn't care about that. It was more just seeing that each thought that arose, the moment I saw it as a thought, as an object, something released, something very physical and tangible, something very clear and present, just released. And it was like, oh, I can't wait till that happens again. Next thought came, same thing. Next thought, same thing. So when you hear me talking about that, that's what I'm talking about, that once there's enough clarity of mind and you're not just constantly identified with thought after thought and all these inner worlds and realms and spiritual seeking and beliefs about who you are and how well you're doing and whether you're any good at this, whether you're awake or not awake, like all that stuff will calm down a lot once that sort of wedge is driven, however that happens. The mind goes quiet. Now, I think it's also often that wedge is driven by disruption. So a tragedy or some major disruption in your life. Often it just puts the mind on tilt. The mind stops doing all that seeking because it sees it doesn't work. It's like your reality forces your hand to see something you may not have wanted to see before. So sometimes in tragedies really do get the ball rolling as far as awakening as well, or something that threatens your physical health, your physical survival, even relationship status, loss, things that are surprising and disruptive, such that to the degree that you can't continue to convince yourself that your thoughts are reality. The way you think things should be is the way they're going to be because you think they should be that way. It gets very hard to believe after a disruption or a tragedy, right? So yeah, that one-pointed approach is another way to do that, and that's what worked for me. Mine was a kind of combination, actually. So again, once that fertile ground is tilled or prepared, then you really have the opportunity for that neti approach. But it's not like going, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not this, I'm not that. For me, it was more like just seeing, like in real time, as a thought arises. And I think that's the key, is like noticing it just as going to. The thought is going to arise. Like, unless your brain stops making thoughts for the rest of your life, which I don't think anybody's really does. May get very quiet, but there still can be thoughts. So as soon as a thought arises, seeing like, oh, there's nothing that thought refers back to in any way that it felt like there was. I can't fully say there's nothing it refers back to, or let me say it again. I can't say there's nothing here. I'm not saying there's like some void here that's just absolute nothingness. But what that thought seems to be referring back to, the I, that is not there. Clearly, that is not there. And every time you do this with a thought, every time you notice a thought, and be really precise about what a thought actually is. And as I've said before, and sometimes be willing to feel some fear, because this can go steep real quick. Then you're in good territory, right? So that was my approach. So it was kind of a fusion of some of the stuff I've been talking about, my own way of figuring it out, and a Zen kind of pointing from a Zen master. So yeah, that's kind of my intro on this, like how this is put together for me. Self-inquiry, in the way I'm going to talk about it, is like I said, I didn't exactly use it this way, but I get it. It makes sense. And one way of speaking, when you have a shift in identity, many things are clear suddenly. And I don't mean like you're suddenly the smartest person in the world, or you have relative knowledge you didn't have. Not at all. You have absolute knowledge you didn't have. You know what the experience, the direct experience of being unbound by thoughts is, untethered, freed from the illusion of thought, and how binding thoughts were, and how small life felt when you were identified with thoughts, even though you didn't realize it. That's a big shift. And with that comes this kind of prajna wisdom, this innate, maybe sort of transcendent knowledge. It's not knowledge you can put into words necessarily, but it does transmit, both to yourself and others. But more importantly than all of that, it's a very thorough felt experience. That's primary to any experience you've ever had through thought. It's more fundamental than that. And you know it directly through the experience of it. So because of that, I can clearly see how self-inquiry does work and how it works for many people. And I can also see that it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So I think my last caveat is, don't stress if you can't figure this out. Like if self-inquiry just doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. There's other ways to go about this for sure. But if it is something you work with and or are frustrated with and or want to take up, that's what these videos are for. So let me give you my flavor of self-inquiry, or some pointers I think are probably the most helpful. And some of this just comes in terms of saying what self-inquiry isn't, because this is what a lot of people, I think, overlook. What I mean by overlook is in teaching, is that you can say in a positive sense what it is. Like you can say, this is what it is. This just 3 simple steps. But what they don't often say is like, how does that get co-opted by the ego? How do you trip up? And in my experience in transmitting whatever this is I'm transmitting, talking about awakening, talking about liberation, talking about enlightenment, it's as important to talk about the pitfalls. It's actually more important probably to talk about the pitfalls than to talk about in a very direct way about what's what. Maybe, I don't know, maybe they're equally important. But to leave out the pitfalls is to really make a grievous error because the ego is very slippery. It's tenacious. It has survival mechanisms. It's older than you are. It's smarter than you are. It knows you better than you know yourself. It's more experienced than you are. So as I tell people, never underestimate the power of delusion at all levels of realization. So for those reasons, I think it's important to point out how this goes wrong too. Yeah. I think number one, the biggest thing that I can say about how this goes wrong is something I've said many times, but is that it leads to conceptuality. It leads to more thinking. If anything along this process of self-inquiry we're going to talk about leads you into contemplation, it's fine. It's okay that that happened in that moment, but it's not the point, and that's not what self-inquiry is about. And you don't have to beat yourself up. Just start again, right? That's the beauty of this. Just start again. It's like breath counting meditation. If you get lost, just go to 1. If you find yourself at 35 instead of 10, go to 1. If you find yourself daydreaming, go back to that first breath, right? Same thing. Just like moo. If you get lost in thought, just moo, come back. Yeah? Same with this. If you get lost in thoughts, concepts, metaphysics, comparative ideas about what Angela's talking about versus Ramana versus this versus that, and your experience and what this teacher said, those are just thoughts. Just start again. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The first pitfall is any of this leading to conceptuality. Yeah. And that comes in different forms. So I'm going to list a few of them, and I just kind of did. But one of them is believing that understanding this stuff is going to wake you up. It's not going to. It's just not going to. In my experience, there are very few things I can say like pretty damn absolute around awakening, but that's one, is like conceptuality is what you wake up from. So understanding this isn't going to happen. It's not going to lead to awakening. Awakening is not going to happen by understanding. It never will. If that's frustrating to hear, I understand. And I understand why it's frustrating, because your clever mind has served you so well in this life, probably. Mine did. I grew up with emotional discomfort all the time and isolation and a lot of things, right? Just uncomfortable inner experiences. So my mind was like the one thing that worked for me. It seemed to. But it couldn't do some things. And it really couldn't make me feel good. That's the strange thing. It could accomplish things. It could solve problems. It could be clever. But boy, it was not good at making me happy. It wasn't good at delivering peace. It actually wasn't good at relating to other people, especially in deep, close emotional connections. I couldn't figure it out. So all of that is something to take into account if you're that person that's like, yeah, but my mind has saved me in so many ways. It got me a good job and it's made me money and, whatever, the strategies of life. Those are relative strategies. They're fine. You're not going to give those up either. But just know that that's what thought seems to be good at. I don't even think it's thought that does that, but it seems to be, right? But this specifically, this shift we're talking about, you have to shift out of that actually. So you may feel like you're really letting go of a certain coping mechanism, and that's okay. But that's why, again, the fear barrier can come up. Or even if there's no distinct fear barrier, before that even happens, you can have an aversion or avoidance to this, or find yourself practicing and then not practicing and then working hard and then forgetting about it for 2 years. There's probably some degree of fear operating there because you don't want to let go of that thinking mind that feels like your best friend. It's not your best friend. So that's one area in which contemplation or thinking is almost like overtly binding you. Yeah. Almost voluntarily, let's say. Then the next one is like, it's easier. It's a kind of a version of that, but you don't really register it so consciously. It may or may not be a coping mechanism as solid as I just described, but it's something like, without realizing it, we start to use our own inner world as a kind of pacifier, right? So we start doing inquiry, and then there's that part of us that feels so close to what we are. It's so far back here. It's so deep in our processing, our mental processing, that it just feels like us. It feels like me having that thought. Oh, I'm the one that's monitoring how this self-inquiry is going. you don't think that because you don't think you have to think that. It just seems like what's happening. But even that, you can peel away. You can get behind it. And that's what's so brilliant about Ramana or traditional Advaita Vedanta is like, it teaches you to actually peel back behind those I thoughts. So understand that there can be a conceptuality that comes into play in real time, almost a non-conceptuality, but it's a thought attachment that's still there in real time during self-inquiry or during a one-pointed approach or during this inquiry into the nature of thought, as I often call it, that's slippery. And it's often the thing that holds people up. Like they may have disidentified from many thoughts, the narrative thoughts, the, ideas about who you are, the past and future. Like you can see through that. And yet there's still this real-time thought that's just like a couple seconds out of phase. It's like, it doesn't seem like it's in the past, but it's referencing the past still, right? Thought referencing thought. But it feels like you're in that thought system, in that thought loop. Like you're the thinker, yeah? This is the key, seeing you as the one that's the felt thinker. That is kind of the final obstruction. That is still the I thought in terms of what Ramana would describe. You can still get behind that, right? So that's the second kind of sort of conceptual binding that happens here. Okay, another pitfall here is, this has a little bit to do with other types of coping mechanisms, maybe has to do with developmental wounds or existential wounds, but there's something that happens where it's like, there's too much doubt, or it seems like there's too much doubt. And that can parade itself in two different ways, or it can present itself in two different ways. One is overt doubt. You can be like, I just have too much doubt. I just don't trust myself. I don't believe in myself. I think I'm going to screw it up. On the other hand, there's this kind of reaction formation that happens with that sometimes, where someone acts overly confident about something, or they're sure that they've done it right and it's not working, or they're sure that not everybody can wake up. I get these comments sometimes, and it's like it's almost as if they want me in complicity that some people can't wake up. And usually it turns out it's not some people they're talking about, it's them, right? And I'm like, I can't go into complicity with that because you can wake up. But again, that doubt disguising itself as someone who has a handle on this and is sure they know about themselves, and they're sure they know they can't wake up, and they know what their problem is around self-inquiry. So that, again, seeing like those are thoughts. Those are all thoughts, right? Those identities are not, the identity of the one who can't figure it out, the identity of the one who isn't smart enough, isn't motivated enough, hasn't suffered enough. Some people will say, I don't know if I've suffered enough for this. All these things are just thoughts. Like, just don't let them bind you, just go right back into process. Yeah, so that's one for sure, one pitfall. Negotiation, I've talked about this before. Negotiation isn't necessarily something that's going to prevent awakening, but it makes you feel ambivalent with your attention. So this is why I tell people sometimes, make an inventory of things in your life that are your biggest priorities, and just be honest with yourself. If you're like, I've never had a girlfriend or a boyfriend and that's what I want, and that's a huge priority in my life, be honest with yourself about that. Because if you're not, then it's kind of that ambivalence. Like, I want to wake up, but there's a little fear that now I won't have what I hopefully will get out of life. And, your mind starts making this dichotomy as if like, if you wake up, you'll never have that. When you see it clearly, you're like, oh yeah, there is part of my energy that wants to go toward developing myself in the real world, or in the relative world, and a part of myself that really wants to wake up. That's okay to see that. See those parts. See their, coping mechanisms. See how they interact with one another and with you. And the clearer you see things, the less it's going to feel like a dichotomy, like it has to be one or the other, because it doesn't, right? Many, many, many people wake up. Most people wake up as they're going through relative development and so forth in life. That's okay. So there's that. What other pitfall do I want to talk about? Okay, another one is, how do I say this? I want to say that at some point you have to kind of become a little obsessed with it. Again, that can happen because of conditions, and it can also happen because of a combination of conditions and your own sort of renewed drive to see truth in a more clear way. And that second description is more how it goes usually, right? So something happens, some disruption, or you feel some failure, or you feel like even failure in spirituality. Even I'm at my wit's end with spirituality. I'm like, that's great. That's good. Because whatever you thought spirituality was, that wasn't what it is. So it's good that you get past that, right? That's a kind of a disruption. But unfortunately, some people, that happens and then they give up, or for a while, or they're like, I'm done with this. I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm like, oh, it's such a miss, because that's a great time to inquire, because now you're inquiring without any silly idea of what it's going to give you. And I say silly because it's not going to give you that probably. Or you're just conflating it with relative development. So it's not bad when that happens. It's good. But understand that just understand that disruption is itself kind of like the universe just patting you on the butt and going, go ahead, go forward. That's kind of how I look at it. What other obstructions I'm trying to think of that come up with this? And then I think the last one I want to talk about, I'll probably come up with more in the remaining videos, but the last one I want to talk about is that many people confuse the I thought, which is not just one thought. It's not just the thought that says I am, or I am this, or I am that, or I am a person, or I am alive, or whatever. It's not just one thought. It's a thread throughout thoughts that feels real. That's what the I am thought is, or the I thought is. People confuse that for what comes before the I thought. Let's say that. I like to call it something like the unconditioned, because it's not saying it is this or is that or is not this or is not that. It doesn't give it a concept, but it is unconditioned by mind. So some people it's like you're in the first step, and the first step is everything in mind identification. Once you take that first step into believing one thought, you kind of believe all the thoughts. Does that make sense? So the unhooking yourself from thought after thought in this way, the neti approach, or the Ramana approach I just talked about, it's good, but it's not like you have to let go of X number of thoughts and then all of a sudden there's an identity shift. What ultimately happens is you suddenly find yourself behind that I thought. Something really fundamental unhooks, and it's the I thought. So understand that when you start doing this kind of inquiry at first, you may not really you won't fully be in contact with that unconditioned knowingly. You'll be in contact with it, you always are, but you won't necessarily knowingly be in contact with it. So understand that this can be frustrating at first. Maybe that's why in traditional Advaita Vedanta it goes in phases and steps, because the first step is, knowledge and learning and listening to a guru and someone who can transmit the truth to you to the degree that you start to feel confidence in the truth itself. The second step being to eliminate doubt, because doubt is probably the biggest barrier to all of this. Yeah. And that's this part, right? Is like the feeling of doubt is a kind of blanket. It feels like a blanket, but it also feels intertwined with the I thought. So understand that. What you will first perceive to be I is the I thought. It's not what comes before it. And that's what we're aiming for. I hope that's not too confusing. But the point is not to rest in an I thought, or even the thread that runs through thoughts that believes I am something specific, or I am something even, it's not even that. It's more than that. The I thought isn't just saying I am something specific. That's just iterations of the I thought. The I thought is like, I am something that can be encapsulated in thoughts, that can be described in thoughts, that can live through the lens of thoughts. That's the illusion. And that's what you're going to step back from at some point. And it might start happening gradually, and then all of a sudden it may just completely shift to where you're like, oh shit, it's gone. That I thought doesn't come anymore, which is fine. And that's good. That's where we're going with all this. Yeah. So yeah, in my version of this, the book I wrote and so forth, I think it's helpful to start with looking at what is motivating you to do this in the first place? I think that's helpful. Why do you want to spend this kind of effort and attention and go through what you might have to go through to approach awakening and to wake up? Why do you want to do that, right? This is very important. Ask yourself that. If it's because I feel completely obsessed with it and there's nothing that's going to satisfy me other than that, and that's my instinct and I know it, that's great. I'm all about that. If you're like, hey, I think it's going to get me all the validation and love I can get because I'll be some guru and everyone will love me and I'll have power, and well, you're going to be disappointed. But seeing that that's part of it is helpful too, right? So looking at what it is that's really driving you toward this, at some point you will, by really looking at that, at some point I think almost everybody, if not everybody, will start to see like, okay, the usual ways that I try to make myself happy, satisfied, at peace in life have not worked. They have failed. That's a good place to be. It's kind of scary and helpless from the relative mind to that I thought that thinks it's going to get all the things it wants and that it, all that. It's kind of scary to that. It's destabilizing, but in a good way. Yeah. So that's where you will ultimately land if you keep really looking into your motivations. Like, what am I really doing this for? Why am I giving all this effort to this? Why am I going to retreats? Why am I meditating every day? Why am I doing mindfulness practices? Why do I do inquiry? Why do I listen to non-duality videos, right? Asking questions is valuable. You will be delivered the answer. The universe will give you the answer. And at some point you will see that there's something off in the way you're experiencing reality. That's what I call suffering, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness. Something's not right. And the usual ways of thinking about doing this, doing that, thinking that, feeling this, believing that to make yourself feel better just don't work, and probably never have. When you see that, you've kind of completed phase one for me in my 3-step process. 3 steps just being what goes into the inquiry, how to do the inquiry, and what you do after the inquiry. So yeah, just really taking inventory of why you're interested in this. Why do you want to do this? And being willing to be honest with yourself that, yeah, it's scary to admit, but I'm not management material, to put it in a Paul Hederman terminology, that I haven't made myself happy even though I've been trying constantly, that I live trying to chase other people's, I chase approval from other people without realizing it. I chase validation and love without realizing it. I'm trying to uphold images instead of being real. I never feel like who I really am. I feel out of touch with myself. I feel like I'm living in imposter syndrome. All of those things are great signs that you're recognizing what I mean by suffering. I'm not saying it's great that you're suffering. I mean, it's great to see that living through the lens of that fundamental I thought and the way we've been talking about it is inherently uncomfortable. If you feel that, right? And you feel even with that, you still feel doubt. Like there's that doubt that feels like you, right? Like I can't do this. Why can't I do this? Why can't I get this? Why can't I, what's wrong with me? That self-esteem feel of like, I'm not good enough. Like I can't figure this out. That's also good, right? Even though it seems like that could be counterproductive in orienting yourself to truth, turns out it isn't, because it's a false experience. It's a false identity. And so you can look into that, right? You can use that as fuel to push you forward. And then maybe a little bit of stubbornness. I definitely had stubbornness. There was this thing that was like, I wanted to rebel because I was suffering, but I realized rebelling against my parents doesn't do any good. Rebelling against the government doesn't really do any good, right? It just makes me more mad or more upset or feeling more empowered. Maybe you have religious trauma, getting mad at your religion. Even that's not going to help, even though you were traumatized. You should address the trauma, but it doesn't help, right? It doesn't help you really break through. So I realized like, oh, it's on me. Yeah. That can turn that rebellion. I actually turned it inward, not against myself, but against thoughts in a way. I was like hell, I'm going to believe one more thought. Like hell, I'm going to get re-identified again, knowing how uncomfortable it is. That's how it was for me. So there's this kind of rebellion that comes along with this as well. So really, that's it. Take inventory. Figure out what this is about for you. Start to hone that down into a one-pointed approach and access some of that warrior energy. Be courageous even when you're in fear. You don't really know you're courageous till you feel fear. When you really feel fear, that's when you can test your own courage. And the courage is to take one more step. The courage is to ask one more question. If you're doing Ramana's process or my process or whatever, or if you're working with a koan or breath counting, it doesn't matter. Are you going to do that one next step, even though you're feeling fear now, and you can feel the stability around you crumbling, and all these ideas you had about yourself are just getting obliterated left and right, and yet something in you knows you can take another step. A step into truth, a step in, or a step out of the thought binding, a step into the unknown, into the unbound, into the unconditioned. It's not a literal step physically. It's one more deep, thorough question. And really looking at what happens and where it leads you. Yeah. That's what will orient you to self-inquiry in a powerful way. Some of that is circumstances, some of it is your intention, and a lot of it is a mixture of the two. But when you feel it, you'll start to feel it. Yeah. Okay. That's all I have to say now. Part 2 is going to be how to actually do it.